Hello, this is Petar Paskarich again for KansasFest 2021, and this particular video is going to be a little bit about a project that was originally started as hardware only on the Raspberry Pi, but was using the Circle bare metal libraries for what's called Munt32, which is a MT-32 synthesizer emulator. And it actually works pretty well. Originally, on the bare metal version of it, I just could not get it to work correctly at all. So I ended up basically recompiling Munt32 for myself on Raspberry Pi underneath the Raspbian Lite or Debian Lite. I believe it was Buster is what I ended up with, or it could be Jesse, because the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus that I'm currently using is also my Pi-hole router, and it also does some A2 server work as well. So it's kind of a multi-purpose little device. But this particular talk is essentially on how to, say, build this and deploy it for your Apple II, and I'll show it basically connecting to Ultima V and setting that up for music, as well as a little bit of the Linux Raspberry Pi side. So let me transition to another video, and I'll show you the setup. Okay, so as far as the Pi goes, so this will be the Raspberry Pi, just standard case, nothing's fancy about it. The ribbon cable coming off for the GPIO was actually used for a project with Joe Stroh-Snyder for his universal keyboard encoder. But yeah, so this Pi gets used for a lot of different things. My DNS server for Pi-hole and also the Munt32. And over here is the standard 1/8-inch out jack that goes into the AV ports on the back of that particular TV. You can output via HDMI if you want to, and it is a cleaner signal, but in order to get sound to work for the presentation, this is the best way to do it. All right, so now we have that put back. All right, so there's me here, and then we'll go to a screen and get that in. Okay, so now on the screen is essentially my Raspberry Pi session, and currently in the MIDI folder, so let's come back out one, and we'll clear that up. All right, so when you go to build this the first time, the easiest way is to go out to the GitHub repository and grab, at least currently when I was building it, it was the Munt240, and then essentially it's just go into there, Munt24, and then it's essentially the same thing where you this uses CMake, so then you just basically run the CMake. It does the configure and the make, and then you end up with a package that you can do the make install, and then that will actually deploy the files. And your actual emulator files are in, I gotta remember these, I use history a lot. So it's going to be USR local bin. So we'll go over here. And as we can see here, there's going to be this MT-32D, which is the master daemon that actually runs this. And then there's also another neat file for this, which is MT32EMU SMF to WAV. So you can actually output your MIDI to MT32 emulations into a WAV file. So you can actually just do pure output. Okay, so another piece of this as a part of building it and using it, you do have to locate and find the specific MT-32 firmware files. And basically, you can just Google those and you can find them over the net. And the reason that's kind of funky for that is because you need to end up, well, getting in the middle of a copyright war that's still ongoing via, I guess, Roland. So you have to basically find the actual firmware for the old devices, and you can use pretty much the oldest version, the version 2, and then also the what they call the 32L, which is what I'm running, and that gives you a few extra sounds and different extra sound effects that you can use with different games that support them. Because you can also just play standard MIDI files against this MT32D process as well. And let's go ahead and do that while I'm over here. I'll transition back. So here we go. We'll do cd/home cd-pi. So I'm going to download, whoops, downloads. And then I've got some MIDI files already in here. So I'm going to see cd MIDI, if I can type properly. All right, so there's a few MIDI files in here that shows off a few things. And the thing with the Munt32, MT32D, whatever, that's kind of neat is that it runs in standard MT32 mode, or they also have it primed for what they call General Midi. So you can play regular MIDI files with that GM type. But there are specific older MIDI files, and especially the game rips, which would be running in the standard mode. So one of these files, let me go through here, and we'll say, let's do the Star Trek. And the Star Trek song, this is a MT32 specific, so it'll run in mode type 0. And then for these, I'm just using a play MIDI. So that'd be the A play MIDI minus P. The 129.0 is the port number that gets registered for MT32D when you start it, and then give it the mid file. And the 0 means run it in MT32 mode, not General Midi. So, and then this is how it should sound. And let me transition over there. And you should see that. And here's the sound coming through. Aha, okay, so actually I need to turn this on for the sound to work. So there you go. Okay, so that was one running in MT32 mode regular. So now let me go over and we'll do one that's actual a General Midi song. And let's go ahead and do the one I use for all the demos, the dueling banjos. So in this time around, we'll do 129.1, which puts it in General Midi mode. Say dueling mid, there's that. And we'll transition back so you can hear. And then all these sounds are being generated by the Raspberry Pi that's emulating the complete sound banks of the MT-32 device. So it's internal MIDI being generated via A-Play MIDI, going directly into the input port internally to the Pi. And then very shortly here, we'll hook this up to the Apple II. As you can tell, the sounds are actually pretty good and pretty high fidelity, and they do sound even better over HDMI. All right, and that's a little bit for that. All right. So let's go back now, and we can stop that. All right. So next up, let's see how do we handle actually using it with an Apple II. Okay. So we'll go back to here. So right now, we can leave everything the same because the MT32D process is still running once we loaded it. So we can transition back. All right, so now basically I have a enhanced Apple IIe over here, and it has standard Disk 2 controller card in it for Ultima V, and it's also got the Passport MIDI card in it, and I've got the MIDI cable for MIDI out, which corresponds to MIDI in on the Raspberry Pi. And one thing I want to show on that is if you're going to use any of the USB devices, actually get one of these Roland UM1s. They are worth the $42. Generally, you can find them for, they just flat out work, where if you get one of the cheaper Chinese knockoffs, usually they're in like a blue package, or even some of the older devices from, let's see, mine was an old M Audio converter. It just does not work well. The UM1 is just flawless. You can send MIDI in and out. It's registered on the USB ports properly with a Raspberry Pi. It just works, and even works even better on your PC as well. So that's what I would highly recommend, and it saves a ton of hassles after dealing with 4 different semi-working USB MIDI adapters. Okay, so once you have essentially the MIDI out to the MIDI in on the Raspberry Pi all hooked together, then let's go ahead and let's boot up Ultima V, and we'll pull that back up here. All right. So we'll let that boot. And I have configured some of this beforehand, so it's a little easier to load and show different songs. One of the things to remember here is that on an Apple II Plus, Ultima V does not give you MIDI support. It has to be a 2E or 2E enhanced only. That was one thing I ran into as well. And at first I thought maybe I had a broken passport card, but nope, it was just the fact that it wasn't in a big enough machine. All right, so here we got everything's loading up. When it gets to the menu screen here, then we can go down through and select the Activate Music. Then it will load up and give you a selection for, this is where you would normally select like your phasers and mockingboards, all different kinds of, different sound and speech synthesis pieces that they've added into it. But what we want is the G at the bottom that says Passport MIDI. And since I've got one already set up, we'll just go ahead and load a music configuration. That's already set up for basically Passport MIDI G on slot 4. If you want, you can also come in here and say change music. We'll say OK. This is where then you can assign different channels that you want to run on, the number of voices. Usually voices 32 is exactly what you want. Channel 2 seems to work the best for this MT-32 setup. And then on the right-hand side, the MIDI number, and these are going to be the MT-32 numbers, not General Midi numbers, as far as the different music songs, the samples that are being assigned. So piercing brass happens to be 95, a harp maps sort of the 57, and on down the line. And those are the current instrument maps that I'm currently running. So let's go out of that, and then we come down here. Once those are assigned, you can say play music. And then here is where then it'll actually start outputting the song based on those instruments samples that are set up. So I'm going to kick these off for a few seconds or so you can hear what they sound like. And here we go. And this particular song is one I wanted to add in from probably 1992, I think it was, when I was a brief member of the Ohio State University Cornetto and Sackbut Society. And this is actually a medieval song that was actually played on those two basically ancient instruments. The sackbut is kind of a trombone kind of instrument, and the cornetto is, I'd say it's a hybrid of a clarinet and a trumpet. And it's a pretty interesting and difficult to play instrument, but very fun at the same time. So this song actually does exist. And finally, this is the last example song, and we'll actually head back to the game. And then we'll see how this actually looks with some of the couple of the screens that play through. And then this time around, as soon as it loads up, it should now play with the sound effects and the MIDI track. All right, here we'll go into the game itself and start, and then we'll see how that looks, and then we'll wrap this up. And as you can see, the graphics and then the MIDI track will play appropriately for whichever level you're currently working on. And the neat part is, no matter what's going on with the sound effects too, the MIDI track is playing pretty much independently of the sound effects, so there's no stuttering or anything involved there. So it was a good job by them. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much my little trip through the MT-32 Munt, as they call it, 32 process on the Raspberry Pi, supporting USB MIDI onto the Apple II or 2GS. You can basically send anything you want to it, especially standard MIDI coming from the GS on the GM side, and it just works pretty well. I will put a bunch of links starting as the conference starts in the bonus section for this particular video, and it'll give some links to the GitHub repository and some of the hard to find firmware files, and at least give you some links to start searching for that. But yeah, as you can see, the Raspberry Pi handles the music quite well, and it was a good fun project once I found the Roland UM1 USB interface. So there you go. Thank you, and have a nice rest of the conference.